All right. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Kara Goodman over at MAPC. I'm here with Patrick Roach. Together we manage the LED streetlight program at MAPC. A couple of just housekeeping items before we get started. We are recording this webinar today, so if we can send it around afterwards, and you should know that, that you are being recorded if you ask any questions or anything. We do have a Q&A box on the side for questions. We'll probably answer most of them at the end unless any of them are immediately pertinent to what we're saying. But please type them in the Q&A box and we'll leave you on mute otherwise. So as a quick intro to who we are and what we do, as I said, we're the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. We are currently running our LED Streetlight Rapid Retrofit Program, which is a grant from the State Department of Energy Resources that MAPC was chosen to administer statewide. So for the most part, we only do projects in our region of Massachusetts, but for this specific project, we are working with towns all across the state, which has been very exciting. We are currently wrapping up the first phase of installations, and we are entering a phase 2 of the retrofit project. So a quick overview, we're going to talk about benefits of controls, the components, dimming strategies, our contracts, pricing, and then we're going to hear from 3 of our municipalities that have implemented these, so you guys can get some more details. So smart or wireless controls at a very high level are internet-connected streetlight controls. They would replace what is considered a standard or a dumb photocell, which is basically just can detect light, ambient light, and turn your street light on or off based on the sun. So instead of that, we have these wireless controls that are remotely controlled through a computer or an app interface. They can operate on set schedules, which can be instantaneous changes, and they communicate wirelessly to each other and back to the control hub. All under our current streetlight program, all of the lights being installed are control ready, which means they have the required the 7-pin receptacle in the streetlights. So if a community chooses to retrofit their streetlights with standard controls and then later decides that they want smart controls, they will all be able to do that. The current phase of our retrofit program is wrapping up right about now. We've got the last installations going on, and we assisted 61 municipalities with 99,000 total lights, which we're very excited about. Of those, 13 municipalities and about 32,000 streetlights installed wireless controls on them, and the rest had the standard photocells. And we are just entering the phase 2 of our program, which some of you are participating in, and we will be wrapping that up in May and June 2020. So hopefully this can give you some information to make good decisions about if you want to potentially include controls in your project. Just for a quick overview, this is some of the towns and cities that have currently installed controls. You can see that they vary pretty widely in both size and geography. So if you want any more case studies, you can reach out to some of these folks. And I will hand it over now to my colleague Patrick, who will go through some of the benefits of maintenance.
Great, thank you, Kara. So I'll walk through the benefits here. And one thing also just to mention is these are internet connected. All of the wireless controls can act as a regular dumb photo control as well. Like if for any reason something went wrong, they all have a photo sensor in them still, so they can still act as a regular control, as a backup. So one of the major benefits of having wireless controls is on the maintenance side. Many of you might be taking over maintenance of your streetlights for the first time, and having the wireless controls allows you to have sort of an instantaneous look at the operating status of your entire system. And you can also get instant reporting of outages. So you can know about issues before your constituents do, and you can schedule maintenance before they've had a chance to complain. You can also be a little bit more intelligent and targeted about scheduling maintenance, so you can queue up, all of your work and have a contractor come for one day rather than maybe having a contractor do periodic drive-throughs to have to find the lights that are out. So it can really help with actually how sort of high quality of a service you deliver to your communities, and it can reduce the amount of time and money that you spend working on tracking that. And some of the systems can, create work orders as well. So there can be a big benefit on maintenance. The other thing is a big energy and cost savings benefit. So when Kara's talking about our first phase of our program, all 13 of those communities were moving forward with wireless controls without the possibility at that time of financial benefit of dimming. And that's because of the way the utility tariffs work. Streetlights, most of the streetlights we're dealing with are unmetered. The utilities assume how many hours they operate. And so for the last couple of years, if you had wireless controls and you dimmed, there was no way for you to get billed at a lower rate. We're really excited that situation has changed very recently. So in October of 2018, Eversource released a new tariff, and MAPC and a number of others worked as part of a working group to help make that tariff a reality. So there's a link to it there. What Eversource has done is they will bill you for the effective wattage of your light. So whatever dimming schedules you might have, they'll basically say over the course of a whole year, what's the average wattage? And the example we have there is maybe you have a 20-watt light. If you run it at 75% output, your effective wattage would be 15 watts. National Grid has an open rate case now, and they've proposed a tariff, so we expect that to be approved by DPU. They've gone with the approach of they've offering sort of 4 different bins or buckets of dimming, and they'll bill you for whichever bin most closely matches your total effective operating hours. We'll get into that later. You can see the proposed tariff there. So we're really excited that now the financial savings are there as well as the energy savings. Little background on dimming. So the IES standards are what most of your consultants will be using when they're figuring out, how much light do you need when you're picking your replacement LED street light. And those standards have guidance based on the rate of the pedestrian and vehicle volumes, or conflict as they call it. So what's really nice is the standards actually discuss controls and allow and support dimming late at night because the volumes of pedestrian and vehicular traffic have decreased. And so you actually can kind of say, we're still operating within the standards even if we're dimming. So to put some other parameters around it, generally the human eye can only detect a change in light levels after it's decreased by 30% or more. So what that kind of tells you is if you decrease down to 70% of brightness, you've just crossed the threshold where someone can effectively notice. Cambridge was one of the first to install wireless controls and has been dimming for a few years. They essentially do a strategy which is they dim down to 50% brightness starting at 10 p.m. going to sunrise for almost all of their street lights. So the table below, this shows some examples of what the economics might be for your dimming. So the first row is for 4 hours, you bring it down to 70% brightness. The next one is for 6 hours, you go to 50%. So that row is essentially Cambridge. And then the final one is for 4 hours, you go to 0. So you actually might turn it off. And that might sound a little crazy, but for many communities, if you have residential areas that are pretty suburban or rural, it might make sense. You might have no pedestrian traffic, right? So it might make sense. So you can see the cost savings. These are rough estimates, but sort of if you have 1,000 lights or maybe if you have 3,000 lights, the numbers can add up and be fairly significant. It depends, again, how aggressive you are on dimming, but the cost savings are there. And just to put it in context, when you see those numbers about doing it for 4 hours or 6 hours, over the course of a year, a street light on average is on a little over 11 hours a day.
If I could just add something to that, so since these are smart controls and they are individually controllable, you can choose which areas of town can have different schedules. So if you want to have your residential areas all on the same schedule, but maybe you have a downtown area or a particular intersection that you know stays busy, you could have those on. You could choose to dim or not dim in those areas, or dim different levels, different hours. It's all very customizable.
So if you are dimming, there are some extra benefits, one of which is that you might be, you will be prolonging the life of your luminaire. So the LEDs are rated for a certain total number of operating hours, and if you're running your driver, the LED at not full power, you are effectively decreasing the the runtime on it, and so you can be extending the lifetime of that. The other thing, too, is that with wireless controls, you can have the lights gradually come on as well as gradually come off, so it's not just all or nothing. There's some extra, or reduced runtime on the driver, too, which can help. And the other thing is that you can build in to your retrofit the potential for increased light usage, which may be something you might want if maybe you want to have the potential in emergencies to have slightly higher use for, or slightly brighter lights for a short period of time. Or your Luminaire's output does degrade slightly over time, and these lights could be up there for 20 years. So, for example, Cambridge has done, they've sized their Luminaires a little oversized. When the lights come on, they actually come on at 75% of the brightness that the Luminaire could achieve. And what that means is that over time, if the output is going down, they could ratchet it up a little bit. And that's something to take into consideration in your design criteria. But there's some nice, so these are some ancillary benefits of helping keep your lights functioning longer. The other big benefit with wireless controls is that there's the potential to do additional connectivity. So there are types of environmental sensors, road temperature, air quality. We have a snowplow here because road temperature might be really important for when you roll your plows, and that might be a source of cost savings if you can more effectively manage that time. You can put motion sensors on. There's also cameras, which you can do some live video, but often it's more you can do analytics with them, and we'll talk about that more. Could be traffic counting, pedestrian counting, which can be interesting. So these additional connectivity options are also a source of kind of expansion over time in the sort of smart city lens. So we'll talk about the components of a system. Generally, you've got 2 or 3 pieces. So you have your field devices, which are going to be our wireless controls, or you might hear me refer to them as a node. So there are cellular nodes, which have a sort of cellular connection, and they would talk back to a cell tower, right? Like say a Verizon cell tower. There are also systems that form what are called mesh networks, and this is where you would have your nodes on each street light, and then you would also have one or more gateways installed around town, usually on a municipal facility, and the nodes would communicate back to the gateway, and the gateway is connected to the internet. And so we'll talk about those are 2 different versions. So you can have sort of the cellular version, or what I just described is the radio frequency version. That's sort of the nodes communicate to each other. They form a wireless mesh. They talk back to one or more gateways, and the gateways connect them to the internet. And then you have your, so the gateway in that case would be the network infrastructure, or maybe the cell tower. And then finally, you have your central management system. So this is the cloud-based web portal where you'd be able to log in either on a phone or a computer to interact and control the lights. So the field devices and the network infrastructure, the hardware, and the central management system is the the sort of software component, but it's all cloud-based, so you really don't have to download or maintain any software. This slide has detail on essentially what I just said, so we will be sending a copy of this around, and you may want that for reference. In our first phase of the retrofit program, MAPC established a master contract for wireless controls. Our goal was to leverage the buying power we had through the DOER grant program. We wanted to give our municipalities choice between the various technology types out there, between radio frequency and cellular. And then we wanted to also, eliminate procurement barriers. So having already done the procurement, you can just choose off of it at set prices. So our structure is we do have a contract with each selected vendor, and you just fill out a one-page form to subscribe to our contract, and then you don't need any other contractual documents. You could just issue a purchase order using the unit prices from our contract. And we worked with all the other regional planning agencies in the state on this, and so every municipality in the state is eligible to buy off of this. And there's no additional procurement necessary. There's a link there. You can find the subscription form, all the documents, the responses from the vendors, our contract at that link. So we did our initial contract from June of last year to May of this year. We are in the process of extending those contracts for another year. We selected 2 vendors on radio frequency, CIMCON Lighting and Silver Springs/FP Controls. They are represented by Fred Davis Corporation, who is a distributor that some of you may have worked with to get your Luminaires, or will. And then on the cellular side, we have Verizon. We did have a couple other vendors that we did approve, but they were actually unable to sign contracts with us, which was very interesting to see what kind of terms they pushed back against. So I think what I can say is great is that these companies were willing to work with our terms, which we make sure are robust to defend you, particularly with a new technology. We think that's really important to make sure you're not ever left holding the bag as you roll this out. So I should probably talk about pricing. So here I've broken it down into hardware, the annual CMS costs, and then these other setup costs. So the hardware, we essentially have our node, we have our gateway, and if a repeater is like a type of gateway that some systems need, some systems don't. Under setup costs, we have commissioning. So, you install the nodes, but there's some back-end work on the tech side to make sure all the nodes are reporting and get their communication paths all set up and commission the system. Then there's also training, because you want to train the local staff how to interact with the system, how to use it, how to use the reports, the reporting features, the troubleshooting features, all that. So we've got Verizon in the first column for cellular, then we have our 2 radio frequency. We have CIMCON and then the Silver Springs one. So you can see that the prices are as low for the node as like $65 per node, or up to $85, $86 depending. And then the CMS annual fee varies slightly from sort of a low of $1 a node up to $6. And the commissioning and training are also, have slight variability. But we made all of the vendors commit to deliver the same minimum things in terms of their training and in terms of the technical specifications for the hardware. They all had to meet the same technical specifications, which cover everything from surge protection and robustness of the actual hardware to the sort of the encryption of the wireless signal and the security around the back end of the system, and also one important thing is all the vendors have open APIs, which some of you may be familiar with. The idea is that they make information about your system if you want it to be sort of available in the web for other web applications to interact with. So it would allow you, if you wanted and so chose, to have some other application use Streetlight data to, in an interactive way. But so yeah, we've got some really, and we can dive into that more in the Q&A. If we applied this, just to sort of highlight this, we look at 1,000 lights versus 3,000 lights. Effectively, if you look at all the hardware plus the stand-up costs, so, you know, the costs effectively that you would have this first year with your retrofit, you can see the all-in kind of cost is between $75 and, well, it gets up to $113 on Silver Springs, but $75 for CIMCON, $85 for Verizon. And then the annual CMS costs are shown below. And I think what's interesting about the CMS costs is if we look back at the dollar savings we were talking about before, that depending on your dimming strategy, the savings from dimming can either pay for all or can likely pay for all of your annual CMS costs. So, and in some cases, you're going to have a bunch of savings left over. But that's the nice thing, is that you can get all the benefits of the control system, particularly for maintenance, and now the cost of that ongoing access and control can largely be defrayed. So in terms of including controls in your project, I think Mike Collins is going to talk later from the city of Beverly, and I think he once said to me, we're talking about this project like it's 2019, and we're doing a streetlight project, and that means we're living in the future. The future is now, and we should do a connected system. So I think a lot of people in the past have looked at this as like an add-on, and I think really a way to look at this now is if you really want to have a robust ability to manage this street lighting system you have, putting in controls is probably a default kind of thing. When we look at the costs, the change in payback for including these is likely less than a year. The standard retrofit that we're seeing in our program, after the utility incentives and after the grant that we have from DOER, has a payback of about 3 years. When we add in the wireless controls, it gets up to about 4 years. And it's important to remember that all the luminaires and the controls are warranted for 10 years, and they have a design life of 20 plus years. So there's still plenty of time after that payback to be accruing the savings. And for those of you who are buying your lights back from the utility, the economics of your project has a whole other category of savings, because you're going to get all this maintenance savings from not having it be part of your utility bill, and your payback will be even faster. So the table on the right just shows sort of what the effective cost per node ends up being, because you start out with, say, we have the Verizon node here around $85, but we can subtract the price you would have paid for a regular long life photocell. We've got the grant from MAPC, and then the utilities are now offering the same incentive that they are for energy savings for the luminaires to the controls. So there's a little extra utility incentive. And so your effective price for the node is about what we see on average for one for the savings for one street light. So it's about a year.
I'll just add to that. So the MAPC incentive is specific for the municipalities who are participating currently in our grant program, and we suspect many of you are the ones on the line, but these contracts are available still for other folks, so they will not be able to get that incentive, but they will be able to buy off these contracts as well.
Excellent. This is a summary of the incentives through our program. One thing I do want to highlight is if you are getting the grant for wireless controls through the DOER program that MAPC is managing, you must commit to implementing a dimming strategy that does achieve energy savings. Now, the nice thing, as we showed before, is even doing just 4 hours of dimming a night down to 70% brightness, which really, can be kind of looked at as like the bare minimum, that will get you some savings. So even that would qualify. We have a calculator. We can work with each of you to look at what specific dimming strategies would do in terms of financials and energy savings given your exact inventory. So we're happy to follow up on that. And then finally, this is kind of just I want to talk about sort of the additional connectivity things that you might have. is our little graphic showing water meters and EV chargers and maybe even parking meters that could kind of be part of this connected world. Two of our vendors in this contract, Verizon and CIMCON, have devices that are on our contract that allow you to very easily add a lot of this capability. So Verizon has a City Hub and CIMCON has this Near Sky 360. Essentially what they do is they screw into the photocell receptacle on the top of the streetlight, and they have the ability to provide power out to other devices. So it might need to power a camera or a motion sensor or something like that. They also have inputs to receive the signals from them, and they also have other communication frequencies built in. So you could provide Ethernet connection. You could provide a Wi-Fi, traditional Wi-Fi connection, cellular connection. So even if you so it really opens up the possibilities. And Verizon had bid a couple of these other smart city devices that you might connect. So Verizon has motion and temperature sensors that are on our contract. They also have a camera, their Video Node 4K, which is shown there, and it can do a lot of that sort of in-camera analytics for pedestrians and vehicles, then send back relevant data over the system. CIMCON, starting on the right, they also have cameras. They've got a few different options for cameras that have analytic capabilities. They have a bunch of sensors, from people counters to flood detection, air quality, noise sensors. They also have a couple of meters, which is kind of interesting, that might be for small cell or possibly EV charging. That's something we haven't seen roll out necessarily yet, but it's interesting that they have that ability. And I think we've seen at least one of our communities, North Andover, roll out some of the smart city tech, I think, around cameras and doing traffic analytics. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our representative from the town of Westford, Chris Kotu.
I'll just add very quickly that if you guys have any questions, please do write them in the Q&A box, and we will get to them at the end.
Hello, I'm Chris from the town of Westford. I'm the GIS coordinator here in Westford. So a lot of the what I did with the system was mapping and doing an inventory of what we actually had for streetlights, which actually lowered our cost for the project because we kind of did the inventory ourselves rather than having a subcontractor do it. If anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. So we have 3 gateways in town, and we did about 1,600 lights. And one of the things that I found is I was able to compare the GIS maps with what was done on our survey, what was actually showing up in the controls window. So in case we missed any lights, we were able to see any discrepancies and go out and figure out what was going on, whether the installer missed the light or whether it just wasn't being registered. But what we did is we installed our 3 gateways. Some people companies will tell you to install them out on poles, but we wanted the ability to power down our gateways. So we just installed them in municipal buildings. We found 3 municipal buildings around town that were in good locations that had utility rooms that really weren't accessed by everybody. And these utility rooms typically had like a window or a wall facing the road where the streetlights reside. So we can get a radio signal out of the gateway to the streetlights, which is about 1,000 feet. So the signal from the gateway to a streetlight has to be within 1,000 feet to have a strong enough signal. And if you go to the next slide, there we go. You can see our connectivity. Kind of the blue dots on the screen are our gateways. Some of them kind of just buried in what was going on. The black light bulbs on the screen are lights that are actually out, and then we know they're out, and we're going to have the installer fix those when they come back to town. We had some wiring problems. Some of the wiring that we bought from National Grid was kind of shoddy. The wires were broken down, so not everything's going to work when you first install it. There's going to have to be, someone's going to have to go, an installer is going to have to go back through town and kind of look at what needs to be repaired and what wiring needs to be upgraded to get everything working. So you'll see that some are lit. This is as green on the screen. That it pulls all these lights once an hour. So this snapshot was taken in the morning. So some of the polling data from those lights didn't come back, but usually in the next hour, they'll all be pulled and they'll all show that they've been shut off. At the bottom of our town, you can see we have a connectivity problem. And CIMCON went through and they recommended areas where we could add lights to increase our connectivity. We're going to have the installer come out and put a few more lights in. And that connectivity problem is mostly due to terrain. We have a lot of hills in that part of town, which kind of block off the rest of the area. So the signal needs to travel like 1,000 feet, but if it's going through a hill or through a lot of houses and that type of thing, there's a lot of things blocking the signal. You'll have this type of connectivity issue. But going forward, we're going to add some more nodes, and the problem should be fixed. That's all I can add about our project. If anyone has any questions or anything to add, feel free to ask.
Chris, this is Patrick. Could I ask you just to talk about how you decided to include them in your project rather than just doing a standard control?
Sure. We have so many lights in town that and the town is sprawling all over we have about 35 square miles of town. To drive from one end of the town to the other it takes a while. So if we went with a standard control with just the photo cell, then at least once a year we would have to have someone from the DPW drive around town and do a light survey, because even though you can see on the screen that some of these lights are out, some of these are on bad curves with no houses, so no one's going to report these lights out. So there are a lot of lights out that haven't been reported, and you'll only be able to find those once a year or whenever you get to have like a DPW guy to drive around at night. So you have to pay someone to work at night to do a light survey once or twice a year, and that person will have to be provided with maps. They'll have to know where the lights are. You'll have to have some organized way to figure out where that person is going to drive around and how they're going to record that information. And that's just going to that would be an ongoing cost to your town, is that you'd have to definitely budget for a light survey once a year. So the controls, we don't have to do a light survey. We can just turn on the web viewer and we can see what's out. And then we can make a punch list for our installer. So when we have, 10 lights out, we'll call the installer. A lot of these went out like after windstorms and things like that. We still have some older wiring out there. And after the initial installation, that's why some of these are out. But so we can get a batch of lights. The installer doesn't really want to come out for one light or two lights. Then you'll have to pay him for a half a day. But if you have a good project to do, of 10 lights, then it makes it a lot more economical. I can't think of any other reasons why, but that was the big one, that these controllers do help with the maintenance. A lot of times we can see whether a light is out before the resident calls and complains about it.
Well, that's great, Chris. Thank you so much. I think we will move on to our next one, and we can come back to, there's a couple questions that came in I think we'll get to during the Q&A. All right, so next up is the town of Ayer with Mark Wetzel.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. So a little bit of my background. I'm the superintendent of Department of Public Works. Probably about 3 years ago, I knew nothing about streetlights. Now people call me all the time. I had a call yesterday asking me about purchasing streetlights, retrofitting, and things like that. So I'm by no means an expert, but boy, I've learned a lot in 2 years. Why did we choose to go with a control system? So when I started here at the DPW, we had no technology in any of our systems other than we had SCADA for our water and sewer, which was a little bit outdated to begin with, but we had no GIS system, no work order management system. So we started implementing a lot of technology, and I was interested in some of the smart city concepts. We put in a radio read water meter system, and when we started with the streetlights, I looked a little bit at the controllers, but I didn't really know that much about it, and I didn't really have a lot of time to study it. But when I had met with the Green Communities staff, and we had gotten a grant to redo our streetlights, and then I was talking with Patrick about the DOER grant, and the Green Communities, Kelly Brown at Green Communities said, gee, why don't you look into putting controllers on? It looks like you have enough money now that you have the both the Green Communities and the DOER grant. So I started talking to Patrick about it, and not really knowing exactly what we were going to do with it and how we were going to save money, but we started exploring it, and I'll tell you, I wouldn't do it any other way right now. One of the term that Patrick and I used while we were starting the process was future-proofing. We didn't want to just go ahead and get a system that we couldn't add on to. And so that was a big item in the selection of which system we went with. We put out proposals, got 3 proposals, CIMCON, GE, and Echelon, and we ended up selecting the CIMCON, which was a really good decision. I've been really pleased with everything they've done. One thing I'll mention is, as you can imagine, I'm the superintendent of public works, so I don't just spend time with streetlights. So it's really nice to be able to get a snapshot of what's going on with our streetlights. What do we need to do for maintenance? How can I track how many lights do we have that may need some maintenance? And we really haven't had a lot of maintenance issues, primarily because both the lights and the controllers have been really reliable. I think out of all the controllers we put in, we had maybe one bad one. We did have some initial startup problems. Do you want to go to the next slide, Patrick? I can show the. So we have. So I have a map and I have a list view, so I look at these probably about once a week. See if we do have some communication failures every once in a while, and then I just call CIMCON and we work on correcting that. We haven't had any problems recently. We did have National Grid out. We had about a dozen lights that we couldn't retrofit until National Grid moved some of the Cobra arms, and they so once they got that, then we had to reconfigure some of the lights. But everything's been pretty reliable, and CIMCON's been really easy to work with, and very responsive to any changes we need to do. We have set up one neighborhood in town. We set up last fall for dimming as a pilot program to see how it worked, see if we were getting any comments or complaints from either the police department or the residents. I don't think anyone has said anything about it. They don't even realize that we're dimming. We're dimming from midnight to sunrise at 50%. And we're planning now, right now, we're setting up some other areas. So you can basically group your lights and set up dimming schedules for different neighborhoods. We're somewhat fortunate. Ayer's a pretty small town, it's 9.5 square miles, so we only have one gateway, which makes the operation a lot easier. Let's see, what were some of my other things? Oh, an example of one of the, it's not a huge issue, but they shoot a lot of movies in Ayer because we've got a soundstage in Devon's, and occasionally we get calls that they want to turn the streetlights off because it affects their filming. And so prior to having the controls, I would have to call a contractor, come out, shut the light off at the pole. They'd film, then I'd have to call someone back and turn it back on. So it was expensive and inconvenient. And now I can just, from my computer, turn it off, and when they're done, turn it back on. Let's see, what else do I have on here? Well, the big thing is Patrick talked about with the dimming. Right now, we're looking to save electricity, but with the new tariff, we'll be saving even more money. So that's a huge benefit. And with some of the smart city issues, if I was doing this over again with our water meter reading, I would have made sure whatever water meter radio system we had was compatible with the controllers. We don't have any traffic lights in town, so I don't have to manage traffic at all with the controllers, but that's something that we could do. We've explored putting up cameras in some areas where we have some traffic problems, and also we're going to next winter look at putting up some road sensors so we can get an idea of the icing situation and be proactive on getting out and salting.
Mark, thank you so much. That's great to hear. I think if we can, we might jump to Mike and then come back on the Q&A.
Sure.
So we'll go over to Mike Collins, the Director of the Department of Public Works in Beverly.
Hi, good morning or afternoon. Thanks for having me on. As Patrick pointed out, when we looked at whether or not we should do controls, I think the phrase we threw around was a no-brainer. I mean, of course you would do controls in this day and age. That decision, frankly, was made a lot easier when, 4 or 5 years ago, you were likely going to do this project just with your utility incentive, and you'd be looking at a payback based on that. Then, if you had green community money available, you could pair it with that. Then when they came out with the rapid streetlight retrofit, as one of the other presenters pointed out, you're pretty much swapping dollars with the rapid streetlight program. That extra incentive there allows you to do the controls at no cost, essentially, the first purchase price. In our case, when I looked at, so in my mind, controls were our standard. Not, for us, it's not an option. We're going to do controls. And now it comes down to, is it going to be RF or is it going to be cellular based? And just for a lot of reasons, the last thing I want to do, and this is just how we operate, every town's different, every city and town's different, but just how we operate, I just don't want another network. I don't want to have to maintain another network. We have our fiber network that we've deployed all over the city. We have 4 different wireless fire alarm networks plus a wired fire alarm network. I my older water meters have a radio network. My newer water meters, which is really what piqued my interest, all have Verizon cell phones in them. So now I start looking at, well, am I going to build a network and try to compete with the network that Verizon's built? And that's easy for me to say. I don't know what it's like. For instance, the last presenter out in Ayer, maybe the cell coverage isn't as ubiquitous as it is in a city. So we are a suburb of Boston, but, we're essentially an urban environment here. So we have excellent cell coverage. So for me, why would I try to compete with a company like a Verizon on building a network? And they're the experts at it, and they're going to be the experts at it. I also believe that is the future, if you will, and I believe that's the way things are going to go. You can kind of see it in the water meter industry. Again, our new water meters all have Verizon cell phones in them. And, 10 years ago, all of the meters were looking towards these fixed networks for water meters, but it was all going to be some sort of a radio-based system like the ones that I'm taking out. And every manufacturer had a different technology, and I was looking forward to this day. I'm like, okay, someday we're going to do our water meters. As Mark said, we're going to do our streetlights. I want it all to be on the same network, and it's still, you keep hearing about the future, and it's just not happening. And then all of a sudden, when things started to go cellular, that's it. Just there it is. There's the common platform. Everything links together seamlessly now. So for us, going cellular was an easy choice. We participated in the evaluation of the controls bids with MAPC, and when all the responses came back, there was multiple cell-based vendors included. As Patrick said, only one of them ended up signing a contract with MAPC, but it just proved that there's multiple vendors out there, and they're all big names. So that, in my mind, further reinforced that that's the direction the industry's going. You're starting to attract the attention of the big players like that this is a market they should be in. Verizon is what we chose, and in interest of full disclosure, we're at the tail end of our installation of the streetlights. Verizon's product that they had when we decided to go with them, we had committed to going with them. It gets a little bit wonky for us because we brought them in and said we love the product, but we don't like the way it looks, and we don't like the form factor, and why is it bright blue? They were very frank with us about what that was, and they brought out, here's our prototype, this is what it's going to be, this is what we're working on, and that if you've been to any of the trade shows lately, that's the product they have that they're showing to the public. It's a much more elegant, just in the form factor. It works the same way, but it's a brand new product. And we made a decision to wait, and we've done this really goofy thing where we've just retrofit our streetlights and put regular photocells on them. And Verizon's going to come back in and change the photocells for us. They're going to take care of that for us. So it doesn't cost us anything extra, and it's worth it to Verizon, I think, because it's it's a major installation, and we're never afraid to work with a vendor to work through some wrinkles like that if we think it's going to really further the industry, which I think it will. We haven't yet had the benefit of dealing with the lights. We also, when we first looked at the Verizon product, we weren't in love with the interface, the back office interface. And at that same meeting, they showed us the new version of it, and there's several new iterations from there. And it's a fantastically improved product. So it does all the things you would expect. It's very easy to use. It's map-based. It's intuitive. It's very easy to use. So, like I said, controls are a no-brainer for us. There are, in Public Works, I'm the Commissioner of Public Works here, we wear a lot of hats, and somebody reminded me years ago that politicians don't put brass plaques on pipes that are underground. So streetlights are one of the things that you maintain that everybody sees. and people are very passionate about it when their street lights out. And of all the calls the mayor's office gets, it's going to be something that they can see, the street light or the sidewalk or the tree or the road. Rarely are they going to tell us that there's a drain line collapsing on their road. So this is one of those things where it's a high-profile item, and to be able to be on top of it and to know before the customer knows it's out, to know that it's out and be able to manage that, that's a huge help to me. When we started this, we firmly believe someday National Grid, that's the territory we're in, will get to the point where they're going to bill us off of the metering capability within the photocell itself. These things are accurate to within 0.5%, which is 10 times more accurate than the meter that's on my house. So they are capable of telling National Grid exactly what the energy consumption is for the lights as a whole. So we knew that someday we would save money. When we started down this road, we knew we weren't going to save money with controls. We knew we would save energy. To me, that's important enough that we're going to save the energy. Knowing that something would happen with the tariff and we would also save money at a later date, I'm happy to report that later date is sooner than I thought. I think there's still that next step of getting National Grid to agree to take the data out of our controls and actually bill us for the power we use. What a concept. The last piece, I guess, is as a Public Works Commissioner, we spend a good part of our day responding to emergencies and dealing with weather events, as we all do. And of all of the public safety branches, we're the one that probably works closest with the utility, because we're the one that has to get the road back open. We're the ones, we run a lot of things that are electric. We have pump stations and all the street lights and all of our traffic signals and fire alarm and all those things. So we're integrally tied with National Grid's distribution system. And when the weather gets really bad and the poles start coming down, the trees start coming down, we're cleaning up the trees and we're in their wires, and we're working very closely together. And for that reason, I've come to learn over the decades that I've been doing this that the utility doesn't always know what's going on. That may come as a shock to somebody. They don't always know what's going on during a big disaster. And it became readily apparent a few years ago in one of our big storms that I was telling them a lot of stuff that they didn't know, which is fine. I'm happy to do that. But I'm insisting that they work closely with me on this project, that our utility work closely with me on this project to understand what we're doing with controls, so that during a disaster, I will give them access to our data and say, here is where the power is out. And from that, you can deduce that, it's probably this feeder, or it's this, or they can best deploy their crews and say, look, we can go get 75 customers right here. Because as smart as the smart grid supposedly is, most of what happens out in the distribution system at the street level, they don't know what's going on unless somebody calls and tells them. So on the transmission level, they have quite a bit of intelligence going on, but at the distribution level, our utility, they just don't have that intelligence out there, and we can provide that for them to a certain extent through our streetlight node network. So we think there's a lot of synergy there that can really help National Grid out during the recovery from a weather event.
Yeah, Mike, thank you. Thank you so much. I think that's a really important point on the public safety piece, especially as more of our communities look to be resilient in the face of climate change, particularly the coastal ones. I think we'll just move to Q&A right now, and then for our speakers too, if you have other things you thought of, we can please chime in. I'm going to turn over to Kara for the first question we got.
So one question was on whether the pricing applies for retroactive installation of controls. If you've already retrofit your streetlights and you chose standard controls, how does that play out? So the answer is that the product list that we have, or these contracts that we have, are available for anyone to buy off of. you obviously need LED lights to install them, but if you have already installed the lights and you want to install wireless controls later, that is totally valid. As I mentioned before, our grant will not apply to that unless you're specifically in our program, but anyone in the state who is interested can buy the wireless controls off of these contracts at these prices. I will note that Ayer actually was not included in this specific round of contracts. They were one of the early movers, and we had worked with them to do a separate request for proposals. So you may have heard them mention some other vendors that are not in our current contracts. So that's why.
Great. And then I want to mention a couple things. So for most of you who are in our phase 2, we've done cost estimates for you. Some of you may have gone to town meeting, to get those approved. We've generally built those cost estimates on the conservative end using a fairly high-priced fixture model, for example, and conservative estimates on your replacement wattage, which means that your which means, as we've seen in our phase 1, that generally the costs for your materials are lower than we estimate, and your utility incentive is a bit higher. So all that to say is that if you're watching this webinar and saying, oh, I put your exact dollar figure in my town meeting warrant, we think you can still do controls for that budget. You might just need to be a little bit more conscious of that as you do your product selection, but we've seen a lot of our communities use lower priced fixture vendors who are super high quality, still meet all the same technical specifications, and so we think you'll be able to fit it into that to those budgets. I did want to mention one other benefit. Some of you may have constituents who are worried about dark sky and light pollution. Dimming is just another great way to help minimize those concerns, and in addition to the energy and the cost savings. I think that we have heard there have been kind of different choices about which way to go. Is it cell or radio frequency? What I would encourage folks to do, many of you will be working with a consultant on your retrofit project, but you can see we have up here the contact information for people from the controls companies. I would definitely recommend reaching out and talking with them. I would also recommend, if you look at that link we have earlier for our procurement, we have all of their bid documents, and so you can see, and we'll send around some other information. But I think making sure, sitting down with them, kind of hearing the pitch. I think as Mike mentioned, to some degree it may depend on whether you have existing wireless systems already, and whether you want it to be kind of compatible, or if this might be one of your first, you might look at future things being compatible with what you put in now. So I think there are some trade-offs and considerations to think about. There is also some slight price differences, so both upfront and ongoing. So there are some things to think about there, and I think we encourage you to engage with them on it. And CIMCON has installed the vast majority of our project, but as Mike noted, Verizon was kind of going through a redesign. So that will be, they'll both be fully available to folks. Other things I would just want to mention is that some of you may be familiar with peak demand management. There might be interesting opportunities with wireless controls to get a second monetary stream through managing winter peak demand, which occurs when in the winter the street lights are on. Possibly doing a small amount of dimming might be another way to get another revenue stream, but we'll have to wait and see a little bit on that. So I might turn it back over to our panelists now if there was anything that you felt like you wanted to add in as we look to close this out. Maybe just to Mark and Chris, as you think, it sounds like you've had a pretty smooth rollout with the gateways and with the wireless mesh. If you were going back to the project, kind of from scratch, do you have any other thoughts on how you might look at cell versus the network you've put in, or maybe you even considered it at the time?
Well, when we were looking at it, this is Mark from Ayer, we didn't have any vendors that submitted on cell. I'd looked at it a little bit, but I wasn't really sure about how that network worked. I know one of the limitations with the CIMCON solution is that you do have a limited bandwidth, so you can't, for instance, if you put up cameras, you can't stream that data back to a point. You have to basically download the data off of that device. So I don't know if there's advantages or disadvantages, but that's one of the things that I would look at when you're looking at what kind of a network is how much data streaming you can do. If you're looking for continuous data, then you may want to go with a cellular solution. And the other thing with managing the network, so far so good. I think anytime we've had any kind of issues or upgrades, CIMCON has been right here and walked me through it. Fortunately, one of their technicians lives in town, so he doesn't mind coming over first thing in the morning and going through stuff with me or troubleshooting stuff. And actually, I think he likes playing around with the system because I'll see that he'll dim lights on his street and things like that. So it's been actually pretty easy for us to maintain. We don't have in Ayer, we have one IT person that runs all the IT systems in the whole town, and so we don't have a lot of depth at support of doing anything. So so far so good.
Great.
I want to add.
That's great.
I can add something about Mark's future proofing. I'm looking forward to some of the things that we're going to be able to do with this in the future, and that's to have alerts from our pump stations. We have pump stations and generators that can frequently go into alarm, and those are the things out in the middle of nowhere where there's just a yellow light blinking, and basically, it's in some kind of a failure mode, so the yellow strobe will go off on it and tell us it's in an error mode or needs maintenance. And we're looking forward to having these units hooked to those yellow blinking strobe lights. And there's a feature in here that will actually send out an email if something goes into alarm. So, and also we went with CIMCON because our cellular network is kind of spotty out here in Westford. There's a lot of hills. And probably also the cost. I think it was a little cheaper for the CIMCON, so we went with that. And that's all I can add.
Excellent. No, thank you very much. And I would just mention also, Mark mentioned the bandwidth stuff. One thing to note, I didn't really get into this, but when we say cell, it is communicating on the cellular spectrum. But in order to keep the power requirements of these devices low, there are a few bands of cell, and so it's generally communicating on a much smaller bandwidth sort of version of cell. So streaming is possible, but usually using one of the additional devices or using like a full cell carrier. But that's something I think that you can definitely dig into these other use cases when you're considering which one might work. But I think we're really happy that so far it's been good experiences all around. So I think
one thing I just wanted to add, this is kind of one of my goals and pet projects. So we don't have any of the controllers on our main street decorative lights. And I don't know if you've been through Ayer, we have a nice little quaint downtown. And so one thing I'm looking into is when we upgrade those lights and put controllers in, is there a way we can stream speakers through those lights and have like holiday music at Christmas time or announcements to people, stop at the Union Coffee and get a free coffee in the next 15 minutes. So that's just one of the cool things that we're looking at doing that is now a possibility with these controllers.
That's awesome. Yeah, thanks. I think that's a kind of blue sky thinking that is really interesting once you start getting this kind of connectivity. Well, I think with that, we're a little over past 1 o'clock, so we will probably wrap it up. We'll follow up with the link to the recording and the slides, and we hopefully look forward to working with many of you to help make controls part of your upcoming project.
Thanks, everyone, and have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.